Hello everyone and welcome to Develop Iosco's Grant Writing Workshop. Our sponsor is the Michigan Office of Rural Prosperity. My goal for this workshop is to get you excited and feeling confident that you can find, write, and successfully receive grants. My long-term goal is to bring funding to this area for projects, programs, and buildings. I wanted to cover some of the trends that I've been seeing in grant writing, and just to give you a little bit of history about myself, my name's Manuela Kress. I have a PhD from Michigan State University, and I've been writing grants for about 30 years, actually over 30 years now. Some of the trends that I've seen in the last 30 years is that a letter of intent, interest, preliminary application, or concept paper is what funders are asking for. They want to see if your project matches with their funding, and they don't want you to waste your time, and they don't want you to waste their time. So this is a way for you to introduce your organization and your idea to a funder, and for them to decide whether or not they want to invite you to complete a full application. Okay. Eligibility criteria is another thing that I've seen changing over the years. So funders are getting more clear about what the eligibility criteria are to apply for their grants. These are typically easily found on their website, or if you do a search for their annual report, or if you talk to a funder. Electronic registration and submission. The days of submitting paper applications are over. Today, the vast majority of applications are done electronically online and submitted online as well. Communication with funding sources. Funding sources are people too, and they want to communicate with you. Not everyone, but the vast majority of funders will take the time to have a conversation with you and talk about what their interests are and what your interests are and how you can come together on a project. Involvement, collaboration, volunteers from funder. Funders are just not giving money these days, they're also getting involved with your organization. They're having their staff get involved in fundraising activities, in volunteer activities, and they're interested in collaboration. Who are you collaborating with, and how can they collaborate with you? Increased competition. I spoke to a funder not that long ago, and they told me they received 200 applications a day. So you can see there's increased competition out there. Municipalities that used to get more federal funding or state funding are now competing for grants as well. So there's a lot of competition out there. Increased accountability and reporting. The days of getting a check and not having to report back are also over. Funders want to know what you did with the money and how you spent it, and they want to report about that. Changing priorities. With the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw that funders changed their priorities. They started working with only the nonprofits they already knew, or they changed their priorities to be more basic needs focused. So, for instance, food, shelter, clothing, those kinds of things, mental health became much more important, and funders prioritize those areas. Another trend that I've seen is one portal that serves several funders. So, for example, Front Door is one where several funders use that portal, application portal, to have you apply to their funds. So I want to spend a little time talking about how to find funders who fit for nonprofit organizations. There are lots of resources out there that are free, minimal cost, and subscription that you can use to find funders. I personally do not use a subscription source. I typically try to find sources that are free or minimal cost. Another thing that I typically recommend is that you start local and fan out from there. So, for instance, every area in the state of Michigan has a community foundation. Your community foundation is an excellent place to start to look for funding. Your community foundation knows the community, They know what's needed. They're responsive to the community needs. So this is an excellent source of funding for you. So get to know your community foundation. One of the exceptions to starting out local would be if your organization is a perfect fit for what a funder is looking for. So for instance, yesterday I was looking at some grant opportunities through the Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development. And they have funding for spay and neuter clinics for runaway or for animal shelters. So that is an excellent opportunity that is a statewide opportunity. So it's not just locally focused. So if you run an animal shelter and you're looking for funding, that would be a good source for you. Geographic limitations, really make sure that you fit the geographic limitations of the funder. So if a funder says they cover Iosco County, or they cover Ingham County, or they cover Washtenaw County, make sure that you either are housed in that county or that you serve that county. Otherwise, you're not going to get funded if you don't meet the geographic limitations. Also, you want to make sure that your areas of interest align with that funder. So, for instance, you work with youth and after school program, and the funder is interested in after school programs or STEM programs, that would be a good fit. That would be a funder that you would want to talk to. Also populations. Some funders are specific by they only serve children, they only serve youth, they only serve people with disabilities, or they only serve seniors. So you want to make sure that, again, that your population matches up with the population that that funder funds. Municipalities will typically hear about county, state, and federal grants that are available, but if you don't, there are lots of resources that are out there that are available. Grants.gov is an excellent resource to find grant opportunities for municipalities. And there's also limitations in terms of geographic area, population size, emergency response. I've seen some recent grants where they were very specific by a county and what that county had experienced, either a weather-related incident or something like that. So you want to, again, make sure that your municipality fits in terms of size. If you are in a municipality that has a population of under 20,000 and that grant funder is looking for a municipality with under 20,000, that's a good fit. If you have a population of 50,000, that's not going to be a good fit for you. So you want to make sure that you fit all of the criteria. These are just a smattering, a very small list of some possible funders. And what I'm doing is projecting into 2025 because I don't know when you're going to be watching this video. And these are some pretty standard dates that these grants are due. So Michigan Fitness Foundation has a Safe Routes to Schools grant. Michigan Department of Natural Resources has a passport grant that's due April 1st of every year. The Michigan Department of Natural Resources has a Michigan Natural Resources Trust Fund grant that is due April 1st. And the reason I'm talking about these two is you need to have your master plan in place and submitted even before you can apply for these grants. So that's something that you could start working on now so that you're ready to go when those grant opportunities become available early in 2025 and then are due April 1st. Michigan Fitness Foundation also has a SNAP Ed grant. That's nutrition education. That's typically due in April. The Iosco County Community Foundation has several grant cycles for their Youth Advisory Council, impact grants. The impact grant is due May 1st, but there are several other deadlines that you can find on their website. And then the Michigan Health Endowment Fund has deadlines throughout the year. They have capacity building grants, they have mental health grants, they have nutrition grants, they have grants that are specific to seniors. So those are just a few of the possible funders that you can look at in the state of Michigan. Energy is another excellent resource for grant funding. The Consumers Energy Foundation offers a variety of grants in a variety of sizes. They're big grants. They give out 2 a year for the Planet Grant, and this supports Michigan's land, water, and air. And it funds programs that strengthen the environmental education, stewardship, preserve Michigan's natural beauty, and reduce environmental impact when natural resources are used. It also funds land supports nonprofit organizations that aim to protect, preserve, and restore land in Michigan, which includes protecting and improving Michigan's natural beauty and wildlife habitat. Our fresh water and lakes demand great care, therefore we support nonprofit organizations seeking to preserve and improve water quality in our Great Lakes and our freshwater bodies that flow into them. And then finally, air. We support nonprofit organizations seeking to reduce carbon in Michigan's air and improve air quality. So that's just one of the 3 major grants, and they give out 2 of each of these every year. So Consumers Energy Planet Grant is one. And then the People Grant is a second one. The People Grant has a focus on working to end poverty. It supports basic needs, including shelter, food, clothing, household goods, as well as job skills to enable future security and self-sufficiency. Another focus area is on education, everything from pre-K through higher education with an emphasis on early childhood programs and college readiness. Workforce readiness is also a focus area. The Consumers Energy Foundation supports programs encouraging students to pursue STEM careers. And STEM is science, technology, engineering, and math. And then finally, there's the Consumers Energy Prosperity Grant. And depending on when you're watching this video again, I'm doing this on July 2nd. And in August, the Prosperity Grant request for proposals should be coming out. And the LOI is the letter of intent, and that is the first step of the Consumers Energy, the Prosperity, Planet, and People grants. So you send a letter of intent and let them know what it is that you would like to do, and then you're invited to submit a full proposal. This last cycle, there were 86 letters of intent submitted for the People grant, and there were 12 that were invited to submit a full proposal. Just to give you an idea of the scope of how many people or how many organizations apply for these grants. And those are typically statewide in areas where Consumers Energy provides services. So the Prosperity Grant supports neighborhood revitalization, job growth, arts, and culture. Again, as I mentioned earlier, they award 2 grants annually in each of these 3 categories, and it's a 2-stage process, a letter of intent, and then you're invited to submit a full proposal. And then finally, there's also the Consumers Energy Put Your Town on the Map. This is an annual competition. You can get $10,000, $15,000, or $25,000. One project per community can apply, which is defined as a municipality. And it's just 2 questions. Tell us how your idea will put your community on the map, 500 words or less, and then tell us how funding will help you implement your idea. And then the top choices have an opportunity to present at a conference, and then the decision is made there. And then, of course, there's also the smaller grants in each of these areas where consumers will fund from anywhere from $5,000 up to $100,000 typically. Some of the projects I've had funded through Consumers Energy Foundation are the Frankenmuth Farmers Market, which received a $75,000 grant. And then recently we received an Iosco County grant for child care management services organization for $100,000. So that kind of gives you an idea, or you can also certainly apply for smaller amounts as well. And I wanted to go into a little bit more detail about the Michigan Department of Natural Resources Passport Grant. This is one of the smaller grants that MDNR offers. It ranges from $7,500 up to $150,000. It provides funding to local units local units of government for the development of public recreation facilities, new or renovated. It requires a 25% match, and eligibility is limited to local units of government. So an example of this would be Oscoda Township recently received a passport grant to make improvements to Ken Ratliff Park in Oscoda. Now the MNRTF, which is the Michigan Natural Resources Trust Fund grant, that is up to $300,000, and that provides funding to local units of government for acquisition or development of public recreation facilities, new or renovated. That also requires a 25% match. However, points are added for additional match. So if you matched it by 50%, you would get additional points for your application. Local units of government are also eligible for this. The community recreation plan, which I mentioned earlier, must be uploaded by February 1st of the year of the application. So again, the application is due April 1st. You need to have your community recreation plan uploaded by February 1st. So depending on when you're watching this, you're going to want to start working on that community recreation plan if you want to apply for either a passport grant or an MNRTF grant. And some examples of funded projects for that are the Iosco Exploration Trail. Funding was received from MNRTF for that. And again, the pier that's at Oscoda Beach Park. Those are both projects that were funded through the MNRTF grant. Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about how grant writing is like dating. As I mentioned, funders are people too. So one of the ways it is, hey, I saw your profile. So you went online, you learned a little bit about the organization, the funder, whether it's a company like Consumers Energy Foundation that has a foundation that gives money, or whether it's a community foundation, or whether it's something else. But you went on their website, you learned a little bit about them, about what they're interested in, your population matches, your interests match. It looks like we have a lot in common. Would you like to get together? Not everyone is going to be able to do this, but maybe if you're local, and the person's accessible, can we have coffee or lunch? I'd like to tell you a little bit about me and how to get to know more about you. So you want to know about what are their interests, what are the things that they want to fund, how do they want to see the community improve or change, and then talk about what it is that you're doing that aligns with their goals. See, these are just a couple of funders, possible funders for businesses, because I wanted to give a general overview of nonprofits, municipalities, and businesses. So the Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development has 17 different grant opportunities, and you can sign up to get email updates about those. So you can be sure to get to know when those happen. Okay, like I said, funders are people too. I went to an Association of Fundraising Professionals conference, and one of the things that they had a panel of funders, and one of the things they said was, we'll get mail, letters, inquiries, grants that have the wrong name on them. Make sure you get their name correct. Make sure you're not sending a proposal to someone who's deceased. I have done that. It's not a good thing. Do some online research. Figure out, as much as you can about the funder. Find out who they've given to before, and find out how much they've given. If they've given $5,000 or $10,000 pretty consistently to organizations, you don't want to ask for $50,000 or $100,000, especially the first time that you make a request. You want to make sure that how much you ask for is in line with what they've given in the past. Now, I have had funders say, ask me for $150,000 and we'll give you $75,000. But that was after having a conversation with them and having made a presentation to them. So that was advice from them directly to us. There's a number of free ways to access the information. GuideStar is a good source. You can register for free, and you can see 10 free views of 990s per month. And the 990 is what a funder files with the IRS, and it says who they funded and how much they've given. So I've got the GuideStar link there for you, so you can go to GuideStar. And then also the foundation directory online. You can also do free searches and 990s. Now there is also a pay option on there, a subscription, but there are these ways to access free information as well. Now, what is a 990? Many foundations do not have a website if they're a smaller foundation. The 990 will tell you, you'll get to know it as you've looked at a couple of them. It tells you if they accept unsolicited applications. And what that means is you haven't been asked to submit an application. You've decided that this is a funder that's a good fit, and you are going to send them an application. The 990 is how you find out how to submit an application. So it'll have the address on there. It'll have the person that you should mail it to. It also, like I said, it tells you who they have funded, and it tells you the assets of the foundation and also how much they have funded. Some other ways to get to know funders, invite them in to get to know your organization. If it's a local funder, if it's the community foundation in your community that you want to apply to, invite them in to get to know your organization. Give them a tour, have them talk to the staff, have them talk to some clients. It's always much harder to say no to someone you know, honestly. Get the funder invested in the organization. Do they do volunteer work? Are they interested in that? Do they have a unique set of skills that you're looking for? Do you need a board seat filled? These are all ways that you could engage a funder. Really think about meaningful ways to engage volunteers, ways that are important to them and meaningful to them, and then build that relationship over time. One of the organizations I work with started out with some volunteers would come and make meals with the youth in that program. Over time, they started doing Christmas gifts and school supplies, and more recently, they gave almost $1 million to renovate a building. So that relationship was built over several years, and is a very tight, very close relationship. And it was important to that funder to get naming rights, so they actually named the building, the new building, after that funder. So find out what's important to them. Is it volunteering? Is it having input, involvement, recognition? Some funders want naming rights. They want their logo on the building. Others want to remain anonymous. That's not important to them. So really talk to the funder to find out what's important to them. Really communicate. Okay, I wanted to talk a little bit about the different types of foundations. There's public foundations, which are community foundations, community foundation affiliates and donor advised funds, public charities. And then there's private foundations. We talked a little bit about Consumers Energy, corporate foundation, corporate giving programs, family foundations, and independent foundations. So there's lots of different foundations out there. How much foundation funding is awarded in Michigan annually? Honestly, I haven't found a current number, but the most recent number I found was over $3 billion, so a significant amount of money. Community foundations, I've talked a little bit about this. Every community has one. It's an excellent place to start. Provide a wide variety of grant opportunities. They provide general grants, capacity building grants, which is really focused on building the capacity of your organization. So some examples might be board training, staff training, working on a fund development plan. Those are all capacity building kinds of projects. Impact grants are really grants that change the ability of your organization to serve a population. So for instance, I wrote an impact grant and it was for a food pantry, a new building. So they went from being downtown in an older downtown in a community where their volunteers had to run up and down the stairs to get food for people. They were very cramped. They were very limited in what they could store, had limited refrigeration and freezer capacity. And they built a building that was a pole barn that was on land donated by a church. And they were able to dramatically change how they did things. Everything was on one floor. They had a place where they could bring the trucks in, bring the trucks out. They could unload. They had more room for freezers, for refrigerators. So that grant, that impact grant, really had an impact on the organization and how that organization functioned. So that is considered an impact grant. And then the Youth Action Committee grants. So some are called Youth Advisory Councils, some are called Youth Action Committees. But again, every community foundation has a YAC, a YAC, that makes decisions about how those grants are awarded and have funding that's specific for youth. Youth grants typically involve youth in the creation of the idea, in the writing of the grant, and also in the implementation of the project. So the youth typically do surveys in their community to determine what is most important to youth and what youth are really interested in seeing happen in their community. So some youth grants that I've written have been for vaping, smoking cessation, a support group for youth. There's a variety, and it's really based on that survey that those youth in that community create, or with the results that they get from that. Can you find your community foundation? It's pretty easy. You can find them online. The Council of Michigan Foundation's website will tell you what your community foundation is. As I mentioned, I'm here in Iosco County. We have an Iosco County Community Foundation. They awarded $18,500 to nonprofit organizations in 2022. And they also have a Youth Advisory Council. Those applications were due on February 1st, and they gave over $13,000 in 2022. Grant writing deadlines are non-negotiable. In my 30 plus years of writing grants, I've only seen an extension granted once, and that was last summer when we had a massive power outage in the state of Michigan, and it was prior to a grant deadline, and that deadline was extended. Typically, extensions are not available and grant deadlines are non-negotiable. So if it says it's due at 3 o'clock or it says it's due at 5 o'clock or 11:59 p.m., you have to have it in by then. I've actually been in somebody's office where the system shuts down as they're trying to enter a grant application. So it's really critical that you keep track of those dates and don't wait until the last day to submit a grant because you never know what's going to happen. Power outages, computer failure. I had a computer crash on me just a couple of weeks ago when I had 3 federal grants due, and it was the day before the grants were due that the computer crashed. So you don't want to have that happen to you. Applicants. In terms of the Community Foundation, though, their deadline for the community improvement grants is May 1st, and you can submit requests up to $5,000 per application cycle unless otherwise indicated. And that's for Iosco. The focus areas for the Community Foundation, again, Iosco County Community Foundation, are education, so programs like parenting skills programs, STEM programs, entrepreneurship, business skills, trade school programs, human services, mental health, big issue, post-pandemic, child abuse prevention programs, and homelessness programs. Workforce development, programs which bring or retain quality employees, employers, and provide training. And then the environment, Great Lakes education and protection, water quality programs, plastics reduction, and recycling programs. So those are all the focus areas here for the Iosco Community Foundation. Corporate giving programs, oftentimes corporations will have a foundation and they have a corporate giving program. Walmart, for instance, has a foundation, has an online grant application through Spark Good. This is a new thing this year. After going through a verification process with DEED, you can apply to local stores through the online process, and there, of course, are stores in Tawas City, West Branch, Alpena, and throughout the state of Michigan. Some civic groups also have money that's available through grant applications. Some examples are 100 Women Who Care, which this is typically a group of women who get together on a quarterly basis and they all agree to donate money to a nonprofit organization. Sometimes it's $50 4 times a year, sometimes it's $100 4 times a year. But this is an organization that is spread throughout the state. I believe it started in Jackson a number of years ago. It's now in Lansing and other parts of the state. Kiwanis is also sometimes has grant funding available. Lions, Masons have lodge charity accounts. The Rotary sometimes has money available, and Zonta also. Eligibility, we talked a little bit about this earlier, but it's worth repeating. So what type of an organization is eligible? Do you have to be a 501c3? Do you have to be a municipality? Do you have to be a school? What type of organization is available? What's the target population? Is it children, youth, families, seniors, people with disabilities? What is the target population? What kinds of services are being sought? So, you want to do an after-school program, you want to find somebody that funds after-school program. Does your organization have the expertise and infrastructure needed? So do you have the staff that can actually carry this out? And do you have the infrastructure? If you're going to be hiring, 20 new staff, do you have an HR department, human resources department, who can do the background checks, who can do the orientation, who can do the onboarding, who can do the training? Do you have if you're getting a federal grant, do you have the financial infrastructure? Do you have a finance director? Do you have a billing person? Do you have a person who reviews timesheets? All those things. So do you have the infrastructure in order to carry out this project? And does it fit with your organization's mission? You don't want to engage in mission drift. So if your mission is, to spay and neuter animals, you don't want to apply for a grant that has nothing to do with that. Or if your organization's mission is to do after-school programming, you don't want to apply for spay and neuter. You want to stay within your organization's mission. You want to seek funders that fit with that mission. Once you've figured out, you found funders who are a good match. So you've done your research. So now what? My best advice to you is to create a grant calendar. And what a grant calendar is, it's a useful tool for keeping track of upcoming grant opportunities. So I talked about some, where they're due next April. There's things you need to do by February in order to apply. So what is it that you can do now? What do you need to gather so that you're prepared when those funding opportunities come out? Because oftentimes they'll come out and they'll be very quick and you don't have a lot of time to respond. You may only have 2 weeks or a month or 2 months at the outside to get everything together. So the sooner you can start now and prepare, the better. So grant calendar, again, useful tool for keeping track of upcoming grant opportunities. I usually do them for a year out. So at the end of 2024, I'll put together my grant calendars for 2025. But you can really start sooner, especially with those municipality grants. Create what works for you. A Word document, an Excel document. There's Trello. There's all kinds of things that are out there now that are technology driven. Do what works for you. Personally, I'm a Word document person. So that's what works for me. I'm not a big fan of Excel, but that's me personally. And then track the grant requirements, the application process, and then assign roles. If you're working with multiple people on this, who's going to do what? And then who's going to be the one who ties everything together? Because you want to make sure that if the person working on the budget says you're asking for $250,000, that the person who's working on the narrative also uses that same information. You want to make sure that there's consistency across your team and across your application. And then thing with any other, any tool out there to help you with anything, use it. If you don't use your grant calendar, if you just make it and then stick it on a shelf somewhere or leave it in a computer file somewhere, it's not going to help you. So you want to make sure that you use that. One of the things to be aware of is that grant writing is a team sport. So even if you hire a grant writer, you're still going to have to be actively involved. This person is not going to know your organization like you do, like your program staff do. So it's really important to recognize that it is a team sport. So some of the individuals to get involved in grant writing are your staff. If you have direct service staff, they have the program related information. They know the program the best. They know the clients that they serve. You want to involve them. Volunteers, if you're not an organization that has staff, but you have volunteers, then your volunteers can get involved in the grant writing process. Board members, maybe you have a working board and they are aware of your organization and what you do. You can involve your board members in your grant writing. Also the grant writer. Whether you hire a grant writer or not, who's going to be your grant writer and who's going to be the point person who's responsible for making sure that everything happens and that the deadlines are met and that you're not in a situation where you get to the point of submitting and someone didn't do something, which has actually happened to me where I've been in a room of people and we've worked together for a number of weeks and we get to the submission part and people haven't done what they needed to do from an organization standpoint to be able to submit a grant application, and all our work was for nothing. So you want to make sure that you have a point person who's sure that everything that is supposed to happen happens so that you're ready to submit. Okay, so these are just some of the things that are typical in a grant package. So the executive summary, abstract, cover sheet, cover letter, different funders call it different things. Federal grants are typically called an abstract, which is just a one-page overview of your organization and of that project and what you're going to do. The Common Grant application, which is available through the Council of Michigan Foundations, has a cover sheet. You can also do a cover letter if you're sending an application to a funder. Or you can do an executive summary. So pay attention to what it is that they're asking for. So project narrative can include your organizational history. So when did the organization start? What are some of the milestones of the organization? Did you merge with other organizations? Have you grown? Have you changed to meet community needs? Really, what is your history? And then what's your capacity? What's the capacity of your organization to do this work? Is this something that you've done before? Have you managed federal grants before? Have you managed state grants before? Foundation grants? Problem statement. So what is the problem? What is it that you're trying to solve? Is it a lack of health care? Is it a lack of mental health? Is it a building that needs to be built? A community center? What is the problem that you're trying to address? Children don't have anywhere to go after school. We have all these STEM jobs, but we don't have anybody to fill them. So what is the problem statement? And you need to have some data to back that up. So you can't just say, this is a problem, but how do you know it's a problem? Do you know that because of census data, employer data, children's data from a variety of sources? Where did that data come from? And then you want to make sure that your data is current. So if you're talking about a problem, is it a problem now or was it a problem 10 years ago? You want to make sure that your information that you have is current. And then the project description. So, okay, you identified the problem, so what are you going to do to address that problem? So what are your goals? Your big, broader, what is it that you're trying to achieve? Then the objectives are, what are you going to do? Or sometimes there's activities that are more specific. And then your timeline. And you need to have a realistic timeline, because if you're going to be hiring staff, then that involves recruiting, interviewing, hiring, and then that person has to give notice if they're currently working. And then the onboarding process, the orientation process, the training process. So what realistically, if you hire somebody, if you're planning on hiring someone with these grant funds, when can they realistically start? Staffing. So are you going to use current staff? Are you going to hire new staff? What percentage of staff are you going to use? So, are you going to use 50% of someone or 25%? You really have to think through, what does a staffing look like in order to be able to accomplish the project that you're proposing? And then evaluation. This is often where grants fall short. So there's process evaluation, there's outcome evaluation, there's lots of different types of evaluation. So what kind of evaluation are you going to do? Is it the number of people that are served? Is it the number of people that improved their mental health? Is it that a building was built on time and within budget? There's lots of different ways to evaluate projects, and there's lots out there on program evaluation. But so you really need to think through, how are you going to know if you did what you said you were going to do, which is basically what evaluation is. And then a sustainability plan. So this funder gives you funding, and how are you going to sustain this program? So after the 1, 2, 3, or 5 years of funding runs out, how are you going to sustain this? We all know I know, having been in academia, that there were many projects, programs that were established at universities. They were 5-year funded project, and at the end of the 5 years, they went away. So what funders want to know now is, how are you going to sustain this after our funding runs out? So we give you our funding, you get established, how are you going to sustain it? So really putting together a plan. And then partnerships and collaborations. You can't operate in a vacuum. You need to know what's going on in your community, who else is serving the population, what services are being provided, who are going to be your partners and your collaborators. Typically, funders want to see that, and some are even requiring now that you have a certain number of collaborators on a project. The other parts of the grant package are the budget. This is where you detail all of your expenses that you plan on and all of your income. If you're going to generate income through fees or through other grant funding, what are all of your sources of income? Are you going to do an annual appeal? What kinds of things are you going to do to generate funds for this project? And then your project narrative. And what your project narrative does is it takes those numbers and it shows how they were calculated. So you have $1,000 for mileage. How did you get to that? You have so many miles times the IRS rate of 0.67, which it is for 2024. And that's how you calculated your mileage. You have people traveling this many miles because you have staff, their salary, their benefits, volunteers, And volunteers you can include as in kind. There's an IRS rate for volunteers right now, and I believe it's somewhere over $30 an hour right now. And then memorandum of understanding, which, do you have agreements with other organizations and what they're going to do to contribute to your project? Letters of commitment, support, and then any attachments that are required. So just a little bit more detail. So typically the project budget is an Excel document or a PDF, or they have their own that they want you to use. So you want to make sure that if they have a downloadable document that you use their document, the funder's document for your project budget. Appropriate to the project, staff, building, consultants, supplies, materials, curriculum, mileage, all of those things. Those are all expenses that you want to think about. Are staff going to have phones? Are they going to have laptops? How are they going to communicate? Those are all things you're going to want to think through and include in your budget. And then your annual budget is typically something that you will be asked for. So, and again, that's usually an Excel or a PDF of your annual operating budget of your organization, in addition to the project budget, which is oftentimes different, which is what is it that you're asking them to help you fund. And then don't forget about in-kind donations. And we already talked about volunteer time. But in-kind donations could be, all the things that people donate to your organization. So it might be food, it might be clothing, it might be school supplies, it might be lots of different things. And then I really want to emphasize that your board of directors should be giving to your budget, and it should be a line item in your annual budget, and you should have 100% board giving. And the reason for this is that your board is the closest to your organization, similar to your staff. And if your board isn't 100% giving, then why should another organization or a funder give if the board is not committed to your organization? So it doesn't have to be a lot of money. It should be, based on their ability, obviously. But everyone should give something, and you should be able to demonstrate 100% board giving. And I've seen this question more and more on grant applications where they're asking, what is your percent of board giving? And you want to be able to say it's 100%. And we talked a little bit about the sustainability plan, but why this is important. No funder wants to adopt a project for life. They don't want to be the sole funder. Sometimes they want to be the majority funder, especially if there's naming rights involved or things like that. But they don't want to adopt a project for life. So they consider their support an investment, and they want to ensure that the program will continue after their funding is exhausted or no longer available. So offer a 3 to 5 year plan for continuing the project, showing expected sources of funding, which could be other grants, fundraising activities, client fees, anything else, as a way of showing that you've really thought through this. This is how we're going to keep this going. So I wanted to talk a little bit about letters of support versus commitment and what the difference is. So funders want to be certain that your project does not duplicate services. So you can't operate in a vacuum. You need to know what's going on in your community. So if you want to start a domestic violence shelter, is there a domestic violence shelter in your community already? And if there is a domestic violence shelter already, then how is what you're doing different? How are you going to collaborate with them? Is it that they don't have space and so there needs to be more capacity? Is it that you're going to be ADA accessible? You're going to work with a different population? Those are all things that you want to think through. So do you want to request your letters of support or commitment from schools or others? And my philosophy always is start from the outside. So anything that you need from someone else, especially if it's the summer. You want to ask as soon as possible because you want to give them as much time as possible to respond. So if you need a letter of support from a school or from another organization or a municipality, do it as soon as possible. Provide them with a template that they can work from. Give them some talking points. Give them a template that they can send out to supporters, and that'll make it a lot easier for them to respond to your request. And like I said, make your requests early, offer a draft, or provide them with talking points. Be specific. What is their level of commitment? Are they providing you with space? Are they just referring people to you? Do they have financial support that they're going to be contributing to the project? How are they going to be contributing? What's their level of commitment? And again, memorandum of understanding, or I think they're called memorandums of agreement now sometimes, is, how are you going to work together? So you're not just talking about this, but you're actually putting it down on paper. So funders promote collaboration between service providers to control costs and improve sustainability. They want to know, what are you doing with other partners in your community? Begin negotiations early in the process. And like I said, it could be shared office space, activity space, referrals, expertise, sharing staff, sharing financial resources. It could be a lot of different ways that you collaborate. Now, this is just a list of typical attachments, but funders can really ask for just about anything. I had a funder that asked for middle names of board members. So you just never know what they might ask for. But these are kind of typical to the attachments that you'll need. So your 501c3 letter, which is your letter from the IRS if you're a 501c3. Obviously, if you're not, then, if you're a municipality or whatever, or a business, you need to be able to provide proof that that's what you are. A list of board members, board of directors with positions and terms. So when do people go off the board? Do they rotate off? How long are your board terms? And then also what they want to know is who are these board members? Are they employed somewhere? Are they retired? So it's helpful to also include not only what position they hold on the board, but also what position they hold in the community. So if they work somewhere and they're vice president of something, I would include that information on your board list. I've also been seeing more questions about the diversity of your board. So if you have, a separate place where you can keep track of your diversity of your board so that you can report that would be helpful as well. Your 990, this is where you report how you spent the money that you received as a nonprofit organization. Most funders want to see your 990. It can come in various sizes depending on what your budget is. Financial audit, again, depending on the size of your organization and how much money you bring in, you may or may not need a financial audit, but if you need one, it's something that typically funders will want to see. Your W-9, which I encourage everybody to update annually. It has the information so that they know where to send donations to, things like that. License to solicit charitable contributions is something you can get through the state of Michigan. A certificate of insurance with named insured. So a lot of funders will ask, especially if it's a city or a county, they will ask to be named as the insured on your certificate of insurance. My understanding is that that does not cost you anything additional, but it's something that you need to provide to the funder, whether that's the city or it's the county. And then staff or volunteer bios or resumes. So they want to know, do you have staff that are qualified to do the things that you are asking for funding for? So if you want to have your staff's education, their experience, how many years have they been in their current position, how many years were they in previous positions that are related. and then job descriptions for current or proposed employees. So if you have somebody in that position right now, what's their job description? Or if you have, I just recently worked on a proposal where we were proposing hiring several new staff, and we had to create job descriptions for them. So what are the requirements in terms of education, experience, qualifications for the proposed employees, the new employees that you're going to hire? So I want to talk a little bit about, oh shoot, I Oh, the last slide was about federal grants, so let me talk a little bit about that. And the reality is, while they can be daunting and they can be intimidating, um, if you can follow instructions, typically your instructions for your federal grants are more detailed than the actual grant that you have to submit. So if you can follow instructions, you can submit a federal grant. Um, it can be daunting. I've had some where the instructions are 75, 100 pages, but you just need to really follow those instructions, read very carefully, and make sure that you meet deadlines. They'll have specific things like font size, the type of font that you can use, margin sizes, deadlines, all the different sections, and what's required. But don't let that intimidate you. Just realize that if you, have your organization ready for when that federal grant comes out, you just really need to be able to follow the instructions. That is the most important piece. So I'm sorry we jumped over that slide. I've been having a little bit of technical difficulties with this laptop. So some realities about grant writing. State grants often have a 2 to 4 week window for response. So that means, again, that you have to be ready to go because you're only going to have a couple of weeks to respond to this request for proposals or funding opportunity announcement or whatever it's called. Federal grants, you typically have a 30 to 60-day response, so not much longer. And then you can write the best grant that scores the highest and not get funded. Funding decisions are made based on geography, based on need, based on a lot of different things that you don't have control over. You can also write the worst grant that scores the lowest and still get funded. Probably less likely to happen, but if there's a specific niche area and you're in a specific geographic area and that's a perfect fit, you may not have the best proposal and still get funded. But the reality too is that the more you write, the more likely you are to get funded. And this is really a two-pronged approach. One, the more you write, the more a funder is going to get to know you, and they're going to get to know your program. And so they're going to become more familiar with you. And the second part of that is that you're probably going to get better at grant writing the more that you do it. And then the other reality that I just wanted to mention, which is a kind of an odd one for me as a grant writer, is that grants may not be the answer. Maybe what you want to do is a fundraising event. Maybe you want to get some in-kind donations. Maybe you want to do an annual appeal. There's a variety of ways to get funding that may not be a grant, so a grant may not always be the answer. But here are some of the things in the 30 years that I have learned that do help improve your odds of getting funded. And one is that the funder knows you. We've talked about that, building a relationship. That good fit between you and the funder. So you have common interests, the population fits, the work fits, all of those things. You followed all of the instructions. You answered all of the questions. Even if you question is non-applicable, put non-applicable in there. I've had the experience of filling out a budget and I keep getting error messages, and the reason is because I didn't put zeros in the budget. So sometimes you have to put in 0 in a budget, sometimes you have to put non-applicable as an answer. The proposal is well written, clean, easy to read. So you want to make it easy for the reviewers, whether it's a federal reviewer, whether it's a foundation, whether it's a corporate reviewer, to find the information. You want to make sure that it's well written, so you don't have typos, you don't have grammatical errors. Have somebody else read your proposal, somebody who's not familiar with what you're trying to do, and see if they can understand it. One of the things I used to do was I used to have my interns review my grant proposals who were not familiar with what it was that I was doing. And you want to make it easy to read. Don't use a lot of technical language. If you do use technical language, spell it out the first time you use it so that people know what it is that you're talking about. You don't want to have a proposal that's a bunch of alphabet soup. Letters of support, you want to make sure that they're current. So they're from this year that you're applying, at least, and that they're specific so that they're not just a cookie cutter. We think this is a great organization, but that they're specific about what it is that you're supporting. And I had an incident recently where a funder said the application and the letter of support were too similar. So they wanted that letter of support to be very specific. And then makes a compelling argument without being overly dramatic. So you don't want to use dramatic language in a grant proposal. You want to stick with the facts. So if there's a 20% poverty rate, say there's a 20% poverty rate. If there's a 15% dropout rate, then say that. But you don't have to be overly dramatic. And then finally, you've maintained a relationship with that funder. So you've written them thank you notes or a letter when that you have received funding. You've done a press release. You've invited them to do a check presentation. You've done your reports on time. There was an incident in downstate where a funder just didn't fund anybody who hadn't submitted their reports. Well, they certainly got people's attention that year because you have to have those reports done and done on time. What kind of help is available from Develop Iosco if you're in Iosco County? Grant research is available, so we can help you with finding grant funders, finding good fits for you. We can help you with develop a grant calendar. We can do a document review, so if you've written grants, we can review those for you or review other documents to make sure that they meet the funder's requirements. We can create boilerplate language with you so that you have I mentioned the common grant application earlier. We can work with you so that you have boilerplate language that typical grant applications will ask. We can review grant applications that you've already done. We can meet with your board, staff, volunteers to discuss grant writing. We can do a grant writing workshop. So next steps, you can contact Chris Martin if you're in Iosco County and you're interested in joining Develop Iosco. You can contact Chris and he will talk to you about joining the organization and also how you can get grant writing assistance. And that is his email and his phone number there. And I want to thank you all for taking the time to learn a little bit more about grant writing and about Develop Iosco. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to Chris Martin, and he'd be happy to talk to you. Thank you.